And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner, and I've had many calls over the years that, yes, there is a divorce problem that's taking place in the community, and lots of times you have women that have issues, and you have groups that deal with some of these issues as well. But there is a small number of men, but a vocal group, that feel that the whole situation is detrimental to men, that the courts, some of the Jewish organizations are not really as sympathetic or working with some of these situations. And when you're dealing with divorce, obviously there's a lot of complication, a lot of feelings, both sides of the aisle. So we have a whole group tonight to let's look at this situation. Rachel Evans, a member of Broken Ties, a grandmother of two sons, two alienated children, who's been reaching out to numerous families affected by alienation. We're speaking with the Bezalel Rothstein. He's with the Shalom Family Mediation Group, a member also of Broken Ties. We're speaking to Rafal, I should say, who is going through a bit of divorce, so we're not giving his last name on this broadcast tonight. And I know we'll be joined by Baruch Nemtsov as well, who's gone through a divorce. So we're looking at all the situations over here, and something very, very important. Let me begin with you, by Rachel. I thank you for joining our program. And you feel the situation is stacked against men?
Yes. First off, I'd like to thank you so much for the opportunity for me to speak on this forum. And I also want to give a little bit of a shout out and a thank you to the founders of Broken Ties, Hadassah Waldman and Guli Weinfeld, who started the organization about 4 years ago because there was a need in the Jewish community, almost an epidemic, of alienation of parents and children and grandparents and grandchildren and so forth. So, and the community now has, I think, almost about 1,000 members, where most recently we attended an asifa last week in Lakewood, and there were some prominent Rabbanim who spoke about this topic, and it has picked up so much steam and so much momentum since then. And it is very crucial to get the word out to the community about what's happening in this particular, arena. Now, as far as myself, I am, yes, as you said, I'm a grandmother of 10 grandchildren. 2 of my grandchildren have been alienated from myself, not from me, from my son, and our entire family for the past 3 years. And it started out, my son tried to have an amicable divorce, but his ex was counseled by an organization called Shalom Task Force to get an order of protection, to take out a frivolous order of protection, because that gives you an upper hand in the courts. And they take you through the secular courts, which I think as a Jewish organization, they probably should work with the Beis-Dins or mediation, kind of like Bezalel, works mediation with divorced couples, but yet the system is stacked against men. And I do want to point out that there are a lot of women in this group that are also victims of alienation. However,
yeah, I'm getting emails from women that are saying that it's not just men, and we're doing it because listen, things have improved for women. I spoke to Rabbi Krimsky today from Little Bridge Synagogue about this issue, and he says, yes, there used to be a time where it was women basically felt the brunt of it. Things have changed in that direction. And obviously, you're going to have situations where we have some men that have problems as well. Let me turn to Bezalel Rothstein. He's with Broken Ties. So tell us about the organization. I know you're also with the Shalom Family Foundation, about what you see out there and what are you dealing with on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so again, thank you so much, Mr. Brenner. It's a pleasure to be on tonight. There is definitely a divorce problem.
If you have some earphones, you may want to put that in, so we're getting some echo from you.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. But there is definitely an issue of a problem with divorce. But I think that the problem with divorce is more of a problem with the court system in general, as opposed to specifically that the courts lean one way or another way. I am a mediator. I've become a mediator just, as part of my own journey with divorce and seeing how contentious and hostile things become when lawyers get involved. Because, a lawyer on either side their job is really to get the most for their client. They're not really looking out for the best interest of the children. There's this perception that there's a baseline that judges, dayanim, that they have an idea of looking out for the best interest of the children, but really they're constrained by legal restrictions, by the restrictions of laws that are not necessarily built to meet the needs of Jewish families. They're really, built to meet the needs of secular families. There's state requirements and so many things that really don't necessarily address the needs of frum families and children and parents together. And the lawyers, they're restrained by their obligations to do the best for their client. And sometimes that means, that they are looking to give their client an edge one way or another over their adversary.
But every lawyer wants to do that, right? That's
exactly.
That's not just of divorce cases.
Right. But the thing is that sometimes, to have one parent trying to crush the other parent, that's not really good for the parents together. If one parent is devastated financially, or one parent is having to live out as a single parent, and the other parent has no time with the kids, it's not necessarily good for either parent to be the sole custodian of the kids. The kids themselves, they thrive better when they have access to both parents, and this is widely known. And the parents do better when they have access to their children. This is also something that's widely known. And yet somehow, because we, socially speaking, everybody loves a good scandal. Everybody loves a good story. So we find it socially acceptable to be involved in these messy, hostile, contentious divorces. It would be so important to try to cultivate the community in such a way that, it's not going to be cool or attractive, or, it's not going to be something to talk about. People should, raise an eyebrow, like, you're in a messy divorce. Why would you be doing that? There's so many better ways to divorce. I had the privilege recently to be featured in an article in the Mishpacha magazine about divorcing in a healthy way, which would be to go through mediation, where it's not a contentious process. It's more of a collaborative process. There are actually more and more attorneys that are getting involved in what's referred to as collaborative law, where yes, it is an attorney trying to get the best deal for their client, but really the goal is to keep the case away from a judge. That the case really should not go inside of a courtroom ever. That the attorneys should get together, and while protecting the.
But let me stop you over here.
Sure.
The problem may not be so much with the judges, maybe with the parents, because when you have alienation and they withhold the children from the other spouse, that's not a court thing. It's the parents' matter. In fact, I got an email saying the parents should be considerate of their children.
Yeah, 100%. But sometimes there are attorneys out there that are looking to make their jobs easier for themselves, and they may suggest to a client, if you got a restraining order against the other parent, I could do much better for you, because that would give me an upper hand. It would give me an advantage in the courtroom. So let's see how, what could we do in order to get you now, I myself went through a divorce. My ex had filed multiple restraining orders against me. I was able to get several of them dismissed. Finally, she got one to stick. In the end, the fact that the restraining order was there, it wasn't the biggest deal in the world. I mean, it didn't interfere with our custody agreement. The custody agreement was still in effect. The restraining order was simply between me and my ex, and what it meant was that she couldn't bother me anymore. Like, she couldn't text me, she didn't call me. Even though I didn't want to contact her anyway. That's why we got divorced, because I wasn't interested in having contact with her. So the restraining order, whoever has the restraining order against them, they are at a disadvantage in court, because every time there's an appearance in front of the judge, the opposing attorney always says, oh, and the other one over there's a restraining order against that person. The reality is, restraining orders are given out, like there's a candy man in shul giving out candy. A lot of times this is how the judges give out the restraining orders. the threshold to receive a restraining order is very, very low. It's not like, in criminal court where you need, beyond a reasonable doubt. All you
Well,
need.
let me ask this question, and we have other people who want to get
Sure,
to
of
them.
course.
Is there any research showing is the restraining orders more towards men as opposed to women? Do we have any research numbers about that? Anybody?
I don't have these numbers at my fingertips. I would imagine that it's more that the women get them against the men because, generally the perception is that that women are victims of, what's the buzzword, the toxic masculinity, as they like to say in the culture today. So there's this perception that, these alpha males, they need, the women need to be protected
Against them,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So the judges, they're very, very quick. You had the judge on earlier, and I'm sure he could tell you that the threshold for someone to be awarded. But by the way, I just say at one point during the divorce, I took out a restraining order against my ex, and it wasn't that difficult at all. But, there was.
So does it get to be a game where, hey, my spouse took out a restraining order again, I'm going to do the same thing? And
Unfortunately, in some situations, it does get that way. Unfortunately, it's very unfortunate, and sometimes the advice, the guidance is actually coming from the attorneys because the attorneys are seeing the case start to spiral out of control. The attorneys are always trying to, pull the strings and manipulate the case the way that they want it to go. But sometimes, things are starting to go awry. So they have to use, okay, we're gonna try this, we're gonna try that. Oh, they got a restraining on you, they got a restraining on them. Then the judge is gonna say, okay, now you both have to dismiss your restraining orders because the judges don't like these messy cases all over the place. The judges like the cases to be, just kind of move along and flow and process. And when they get hostile, what happens is you're adding on months of delays and just schlepping to the case because the judge doesn't really want to see you at all.
Well, he'd rather there be arbitrary. Let me turn to Rafal.
Yeah, go ahead.
We have a panel. Rafal, what's your story? You're going through a bit of divorce right now. We're not giving your last name. We're not putting your video image up on YouTube, but tell us what's going on with you.
Yes, thanks so much, Zev, for having this conversation. It's really appreciated. I am going through a very difficult divorce. I wasn't aware of any of these kind of issues before I was in this unfortunate parsha myself. I was actually sort of on the other side where I assumed a lot of the things Bezalel just said was just generally the case. Restraining orders against, the husbands. I just, accepted that. If I heard about something like that, I just accepted that, obviously the husband must have been a maniac. If the woman was an aguna, obviously the guy's being a jerk. If he's not seeing his kids, obviously it's because he must be some kind of abusive danger to the children. These are just all basic assumptions that we just make if we don't know anything about how these systems work. And it's really upsetting to me that it's really not. It's not what it looks like. And I've met a lot of people along the way. In my case, I'm lucky. The alienation attempts, I've overcome them for the most part. There's still a very active campaign against me, but I do get to see my kids now on a fairly regular basis. It wasn't a given. It's only because, thank God, I had the parents who supported me, who were able to give me a little bit of money, not a little bit, quite substantial, several tens of thousands of dollars, go into a bit of debt, but they did have the money available to do that. And I was able to get a very good lawyer, and we fought the allegations. And when I ran out of money, thank God, an incredible, kind-hearted team of pro bono lawyers stepped up and are representing me now. And it's really only all hashgacha pratis and strokes of luck.
How long are you going through this process?
It's going to be almost 2 years.
2 years.
Coming up soon.
And it drags on through the courts, right?
It just keeps going and going. There's no end in sight. The other side has unlimited money. They made that very clear to me directly. They said, we have unlimited money. They offered me some money, like a token amount, to just walk away. Obviously, I offered them the same thing back, to just walk away, or just not walk away, but just end this. There's just nothing. We're not fighting over anything. The allegations were already proven false. They were forced to withdraw the allegations just recently in court. So it's just really just unbelievable how my time with my children is still limited, but it's like substantial enough that like I can see them. Like, I know Baruch here. I know a little bit about his story, and how painful. Like I could imagine, I feel so much pain when I'm, not able to see them, and I just cannot imagine. I'm just, looking forward to giving me a chance to speak. And I just want to say also, Mrs. Evans, who I don't know, but I'm just so happy to see that there's a grandmother on this panel, because those are the voices that I never knew existed. And I think people don't know that when you eliminate a father and you just destroy a father, there's a grandmother who's suffering so immensely, and there's an entire extended family, my parents, my mother, my sisters who don't see their nephews, and my cousins, and like they all just lose. There's a family simcha and they're not there in the picture anymore. Like what happened? Like what changed? So divorce was filed, fine, let's get divorced, but why do the kids just lose an entire branch, dozens, hundreds of people that they would have grown up with, that they would have had a life with, and now they're just gone? And there's
very,
no
very, very, very interesting point.
So it's so detrimental to the kids. They suffer. The kids are the one that suffer. It's, in my situation, I try to file for a grandparent visitation. My son's ex is being represented by Shalom Task Force, and I do want to say that Shalom Task Force started out as a very noble organization. They provided shelter and refuge for women that were truly abused. It began about 20 years ago by Nechama Wolfson. She had a wonderful.
I don't want to focus too much on an organization, and you can say lots of Jewish organizations, and when they first were formed, with the women were the most risk. Today, things may have changed because women's rights have been more recognized by the courts, by these organizations, so you can have men have, and we have no problem.
But I'm making a point here. The reason I'm saying that is because this organization and other social service Jewish organizations that I can't speak for personally.
We've had Ora on where people said the same thing about Ora, and you can say right. So the Jewish groups again were formed probably for the women. The
point I'm trying to make here is that they are heavily funded through the OVW, which was the through VAWA, the Violence Against Women's Act, and OVW, I believe, is the thing in Albany that funds them. And it was specifically earmarked for abused women. And yet, why are these organizations using people who are giving tzedakah money, taxpayer money, to fight a grandmother? I didn't have an order of protection against my grandchildren. I was besides the parents, I was one of the primary caretakers of those children. And then suddenly, after this order of protection, which was encouraged by Shalom Task Force, they tell the women, go get an order of protection. And like Bezalel said, because that gives you an upper hand and leverage in the courts, and it kind of handcuffs them. And the courts are stacked against men. And my feeling is, why are Jewish organizations going to secular courts? My son's not a criminal. He was never convicted of a crime. He actually had a very honorable profession with the NYPD. He was about to become sergeant, and she ruined his career by making false accusations, although he was clear.
But that's the whole problem of divorce, is that you have people, listen, I've heard people get arrested and they claim that they're abusing the children when they're not, and the police arrest first and ask questions later. Unfortunately, that's part of the problem. Let me turn to Burke.
They never said, this last thing, I'm going to finish with this. They never accused him of abusing his children, ever. What they say is that, well, if you abuse your wife, the women, and the children are automatically removed. And they just are they're facilitating fatherless children, and they're facilitating the alienation of children, which is, I'm not going to go into the detrimental effects of it now. That could be a whole other conversation. But these children suffer irreparable harm for many years to come.
Listen, when you have children that are estranged from either a father or a mother, it's detrimental to the children. I've got some emails about that are saying that the parents have to be considerate of the children, not just think about themselves. I read that earlier.
Correct.
Let me turn to Baruch Nemtso. Let me hear your story.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. My story is that I currently cannot see my son since November 7, 2021. And there is no reason other than...
Well, what are the courts here? What is the basis that you're not allowed to see your son?
I have joint legal custody. The court awarded that as a paperwork standard, but the mother has all the decision making. So it's up to her to decide whether the child could go on a visit with a father, myself, or not. And she chooses to get a blank check, I would call it, saying that our son has special needs. So the court defaults all decisions to the mother, being that she's the primary residential custodian. Even though we have joint legal custody, I have no decision involvement whatsoever. So I begged to the court for 2 years straight. Tears, words, lawyers without a lawyer. Speaking for myself actually works better than having a lawyer, because the lawyer needs to follow certain protocols and every claim that is presented needs to be responded to. So I felt that I was able to represent my own self and son on my own. However, it falls
When you
on
say you were on your own, you mean you were your own lawyer?
self-represented in the court.
Now, forgive me, unless it's a matter of financial interest, generally speaking, lawyers know the law better than the individual, as smart as individuals are. And for the most part, lawyers know how to navigate the system. An individual
Yes, I
doesn't know
started
how.
with an attorney, and after spending tens of thousands of dollars going through the frivolous, meaningless arguments, because there was nothing substantial that we were discussing, just simple scheduling tactics and who should pick up the child and who should email first. So adding on, every time I had an attorney, they added more requirements onto me that I have to do certain things in order to actually come to a visit.
We're looking at divorce and how some men are feeling alienated from the whole divorce process. Some of them have no contact with their children. And we're going to continue our conversation. Rachel Evans is a member of Broken Ties, a grandmother of two. Well, she's grandmother of 10, but two of her grandchildren she's not able to see because of alienation. We're also speaking to Bitzalo Rothstein of Broken Ties. He's with the Shalom Family Mediation. And Baruch Nemtsov is somebody who's gone through a divorce, and Rafal is going through a bit of divorce as well. When we come back, we'll be joined by Judge David Kirschblum. He was on earlier. He was a family judge, and now he's in practice, and we're going to take your phone calls as well. We're going to be right back. And if you'd like to participate in that conversation, we're ready to have some callers on the line. 212-769-1925. 212-769-1925. You want to email us? Email is a wonderful way to have your questions answered. Zev@talklinenetwork.com. Zev@talklinenetwork.com. And a program note at 2 o'clock this morning, you'll hear David Lichtenstein in his wonderful headline show dealing with influencers and Jewish law. We're going to be right back. And we're back. Before we get back to our panel, and by the way, we're going to take your phone calls in just a few minutes at 212-769-1925. If you're on the line, we're going to get you. But let's first go to Dov Shurin to the latest news in Israel. Good morning to you, Dov. Dov, are you there? Okay, you sound like you're underwater. Dov, are you there? I guess your connection is bad. Okay, we're going to get you a little later on, Dov, because we cannot hear you now. Okay. We are back and we're looking at divorce Jewish style and how it affects Jewish men, especially. There's been a lot of attention paid to women. Tonight we're paying attention to the men. Rachel Evans is a member of Broken Ties, a grandmother of 10. Two of them she's not able to see. Betzalo Rothstein is with a group called Broken Ties, also Shalom Family Mediation. Baruch Nemtsov went through a divorce, and Rafal has gone through a divorce. And right now we're joined by the former judge who's been 24 years in family practice, family court, and now he's in private practice. Judge David Kirschblum joins us with a company called Kirschblum Tabor PC. Okay, so let's go now to our guests. And Dov, we're going to get you a little later on, and we're taking your phone calls, and let's see who we're going to take. Okay, let's take Yoshua first. Okay, Yoshua, you're on the air. Go ahead, Yoshua. Yoshua from Brooklyn, are you there? Okay, you know what? For some reason, we're having trouble hearing the phone call, so we're gonna reconvene. Okay, let me turn to our panel. Let me turn to the judge. You've been listening to the conversation. What are your thoughts?
So certainly the stories are difficult to listen to. Having been on the bench myself, I can appreciate the plights that all of these people have experienced. This is difficult. This area of law is very difficult. If I can, just for the viewership, just give some idea of how the process works. There is a petitioner. Sometimes it's man, sometimes it's woman. They go into the family court. They file a petition. They immediately get seen by a judge in what's called an ex parte type of way, where they go into an intake part. They have already completed a petition, usually prepared by a clerk of the court, that alleges all of the things that took place. The judge will ask some questions and usually err on the side of caution and issue a temporary order of protection. The temporary order of protection usually will be a stay away from certain types of acts: harassment, menacing, reckless endangerment, assault, battery. If the allegations are really egregious, then they might include also, you have to stay away from the common household. So if parties are living together, then someone can be excluded from the home. This happens for men, this happens for women. Insofar as the percentage, in my day, I would say that most of the time, and when I say most, it could even be 51%. It was more than that, but it usually was women who would be the one who would be filing the petition. But there were plenty of men who were also filing a petition. Once that petition is heard and a temporary order of protection is issued, then a court date is scheduled where service of process has to be effectuated on the other party, and then the other party has a right to come in and to be able to argue their case, or at least if they've been directed to stay away, to try and be allowed to come back into the home. Are there egregious stories? There are. There was a story that unfortunately happened in a community, a religious community, where the wife desperately wanted the husband out. She knew that there was no allegations, truthful allegations of any physicality. So she literally went to a wall and headbutted it. And then she had a visible marking on her forehead. She called the police. The police came. They saw the physical marking. The man was told to stay away from the household. The next morning, the wife went in and was able to secure an order of protection, which included all of the stayaways, including get out of the house, stay away from the house. The return date was 30 days later, and in the interim, mom had already filed a petition for child support, for custody, etc. So are these tools that can be used in the wrong way? Of course, and I would say that that's the case for both genders, but unfortunately, that's the worst case scenarios. And unfortunately, we see it not just for orders of protection, we see it in custody matters where there are false allegations of neglect and abuse. These are the worst types of situations, and that's why it takes a special attorney who can handle custody matters. Having done it on the juror side and now doing it on the representation side, it is a very tough area of law. And as I said earlier, if you're going to hire a lawyer, make sure you look at their resume, you look at how many custody matters they've dealt with, make sure that you're hiring someone who's worth the money that they are going to charge. I disagree with the idea of ever being pro se, of ever representing yourself. I do not, and I say this with respect, I do not believe that a judge is going to listen to you more just because you're speaking versus a lawyer speaking on your behalf. I would like to believe that if you hire a good lawyer, they will be impacting. Will they be impacting dispositively? You got to remember that there's always two sides to a story. But I always like to hear from a lawyer because unfortunately parties became emotional and sometimes their emotions were taking over what they wanted to say.
Let's you get Yeshua and Flatbush. Are you there?
I'm here.
Go ahead, Yeshua. Your question and commentary, guess.
Okay, I just want to bring up a couple of issues that I'm not sure people are familiar with about how the system works. Once these orders of protection are granted, every man who has an order of protection against him almost always goes to jail, and very often goes to jail for things that they did not do. The law with an order of protection in 52 states is that if you are accused, not if you violate the order of protection, but if you're accused of violating the order of protection, you automatically get arrested. The system tells you don't have to worry about it. If you get arrested, then we'll find out if you were guilty or not. In order to find out if you're guilty or not, you continue with an order of protection for another 2 years, at least at a minimum, because the cases drag on. And it costs tens of thousands of dollars. In the meantime, because you are a violator of an order of protection, you're at risk of every possible other wrong thing going on in your matrimonial case. These cases are supported wildly by organizations like Shalom Task Force, Sister to Sister. Shalom Task Force is under a lot of pressure because they're under investigation for doing a lot of fraud.
You know, I don't want to hold on 1 second. Let's say this. Shalom Task is not here. They do wonderful work. You may have instances that you've had a bad experience. I can't talk about it. But I as I said earlier, whether Shalom Task Force or Amudim, other groups, I think originally when most of the cases dealt with women, and I think things have changed where it became easier for women to listen. A lot of women went through a tough time getting a divorce. It's a little easier for them because of all these organizations and demonstrations and groups like ORA. So maybe there's some men that have some issues and have no problem if any of these organizations want to come on. But I don't want to particularly single out any particular group because it's probably germane to a lot of different groups.
Zev, can I respond?
Without singling out any particular organization, one of the problems is that when we approach forums as this one, such as this one, the answer is always no. Shalom Task Force and all these other organizations are doing a wonderful job. If people really want to find out what's really going on, they need to look and see if they're really doing a wonderful job. To see if the Rabbanim are being fooled into supporting false causes, that are destroying Jewish families and tearing children apart.
Well, let me say this again. There's a lot of different groups. I don't want to pick in any particular group.
Without picking on any group.
Okay, for the most part, these groups do a lot of work, and whether it's Amudim or OHEL, and I'm familiar with lots of these groups, Shalom Task Force, ORA, but there may be instances where there is a particular case where there may be a different approach that is taking place over here.
Again, so without singling out any particular group, right, again, I'm going to say that the problem is that when these groups are under any scrutiny, generally we get answers like this saying, no, they do good work, and people are not willing to investigate and find out what's really going on. Now, besides for that, the system itself, the court system, is terribly rigged. For example, as a support magistrate you have on the air will know about Article 4D, right, which encourages the court to maximize child support payments and encourages the court to ignore and deny downward modifications in where you have a father paying child support that is way out of his reach and he can't pay it. And fathers often, very often, get into a lot of a mess because the support magistrates order them to pay what they cannot afford. And this is very common. There's also another issue.
So let me
in
turn
the
to the judge. Is that true? Is that they have forced fathers to pay more than they can afford?
So I'm not sure who this individual is. I'm afraid that possibly he appeared before me. The answer to the question is...
didn't. I've never followed downward modification.
I see. Well, maybe you should have. The promulgated rules are that there's a percentage of one's income for purposes of setting an order of support. It's required by statute. But if we have non-credible paying parents, non-custodial parents, their income is not verified, their income is purported to be X, but we believe that it's Y, then we will use a different basis. We'll use either needs of the children or we will impute income to that non-custodial parent. So is it possible that someone who purports to make a minimum wage but is living in a house where their taxes are $20,000+ per year will be limited to the child support commensurate with someone who makes minimum wage? It's very possible that they will be ordered to pay a much higher amount, and then they will say, I can't pay it. I'll sooner go to jail. Did I jail people for contempt of court orders of child support? I did. They came up with the money quite quickly. So while I didn't want for my court to be a coercive court, sometimes people, and I hate to digress, but it's similar to tuition assistance in yeshiva. Sometimes people represent their incomes a little differently than what they truly have because they believe that they'll end up having to pay less. It's just the way that unfortunately these things have unfolded, and therefore don't always believe, even though someone's raised the right hand under penalties of perjury, that they're telling us the truth, that their income as they reported is truly their income.
Anyway, thank you for your...
comment on something the magistrate said earlier about, I have something to say about the ex parte hearing. You see, that in itself is a huge problem because a woman goes in, and I'm saying woman because it is the vast majority of the time, and I think we all know this, goes to court. In my son's case, she didn't even show up. It was during COVID. She just made a phone call, made a bunch of, list of complaints against my son, who happened to have been a respectable member of the NYPD and had a sterling reputation. Well, next thing he knows, a week later, order of protection showing up at his door. He was completely blindsided. He had initiated a very amicable divorce and had offered her a very generous settlement. And it specifically said, let's stay out of the secular courts. We are a Jewish couple. There's no reason to go to the secular courts. If anything, it should be adjudicated in a based in. But the reason I'm saying that is he had no due process. He had no opportunity to respond until 3 months later. His attorneys, and yes, he is pro se now, Mr. Kirschblum, because his attorneys, one after the other, misled him. He was actually supposed to have a hearing. He was supposed to have a hearing. I forgot the name of that, what they call that, but he was supposed to have a hearing where he'd be able to defend himself and defend against the charges. Criminals in family court, or I'm sorry, criminals in criminal court are given better, they're treated better and their rights are treated. They're not trampled on. These men have no due process. And Organizations like Shalom Task Force, or whether it be Amudim or the others, are encouraging women. They say, get an order of protection first, because as soon as you have that, that will handcuff the men and that will hold them up in court, and you will have the upper hand.
So let me just respond, if I may.
Go ahead, Judge. Let the judge respond. Let the judge respond to you. Go ahead, Judge.
So
Go ahead.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I'm not going to say the system is perfect to suggest that the criminal court is a court where they effectuate justice in a better way. The family court is quite undermanned and overworked. I say that personally, one of the reasons why I put in for retirement, in addition to my entrepreneurial spirit. But I will say that in my practice, my approach is very, very different. I attack these orders of protection. I am representing a lot of men and defending them in these orders of protection. And I will tell you, I've beaten these orders of protection. And if and when I do, then those same petitioners, those mothers, will never be able to go back into family court and be able to effectuate the damage they did in the first place. Oftentimes, a judge will.
How much did it cost, though?
Let me just finish. Oftentimes, judge will give respondents an opportunity and their attorneys an opportunity to consent to the entry of an order of protection with what's called without findings of any wrongdoing. Then in essence, then will be an order of protection keeping the peace. So they would suggest, but in reality, you're giving an instrument that could be abused, as the other person had said earlier. Once there is an order of protection, if you violate the order of protection, that is a contempt of court. There's an automatic incarceration, or at the very least, is an automatic arrest. So what does one do? As I said earlier, get a good lawyer, a lawyer who knows how to fight these, and a lawyer who also is able to speak and be able to impress upon the bench that this is unjust and should not happen. I had a case in Nassau County.
I have to say, this is so arrogant. We have to stop.
Hold on one second.
Just one more thing.
Sorry, Your Honor, but this is so arrogant. Not everybody.
Hold on. You got everybody one at a
$500.
time. One at a time. Let the judge finish. I'm going to get to you, Rafal, but let the judge finish. Yes.
I just want it to be clear, and there are judges who will adjudicate cases different than others. I had a case just this past week in Central Islip. The mother had come with another lawyer, wanted a further continuance, and I was able to impose upon the judge and impress upon the judge that this is just not fair to my client. He allowed for the case to proceed, and for all intents, the order of protection was stayed. It was put to the side.
Let me have
not necessary.
Rafal, you wanted to say something.
Well, it's just hard for me to listen to this because it's so arrogant. And I'm sorry, Your Honor, I'm lucky I'm not in your courtroom, but it's so arrogant of you to just say, get a good lawyer, as if anybody can just afford $500 or $600 an hour. And as you said, you basically, you help fight against his order of protection. Well, bravo. How much did it cost the fathers who are fighting these tens of thousands of dollars? How much in fees did you take from them? And by that time, after they fought the false order of protection, now they have to begin trying to fight to get their kids back. After the tens of thousands, then they have no more money left. Then they can't even, and by that point, the children are completely alienated from the father because they've spent a few months getting the order of protection lifted, and the kids have been told in the meantime, oh, your father's, he's a bad guy, got this order of protection.
I think what happens if they can't afford a lawyer? You're saying get a good lawyer. It's not getting a lawyer; it's getting a good lawyer.
It's so unbelievably arrogant and patronizing, as if all of us just have what you have.
Speaking of lawyers, may I say something here? My son his first two lawyers were incompetent. They misguided him. They gave him bad information. They put him in a worse position. His third lawyer was competent and good. And one day they were mediating. The judge said, go out and mediate among yourselves. And, stipulated, it was stipulated, we will allow for unsupervised visitation. I'm sorry, the judge said if the other side allows it, we will be okay with it. Well, they did that for about an hour or two. And finally, my son's attorney said, this is not working. You're going to end up paying me thousands and thousands of dollars because Shalom Task Force has absolutely no motivation to settle. For goodness sake, he was just asking.
Hold on. Then are these organizations part of the lawsuit?
Provide visitation in a family's home. He wasn't asking for custody or, heaven forbid, even visitation for himself. It was a supervised visitation, but not to have to pay CFS and some of these agencies that work directly with the courts to pay thousands and thousands of dollars. My son went from making a very good income and going on a trajectory of promotion to become a sergeant to going completely bankrupt. So in all due respect, when you talk about hiring attorneys, that's impossible. Shalom Task Force provides free attorneys for years and years and years. How is
So
that?
let me say, isn't there an
how is that fair?
organization? Let me turn
There
to
are
the
no
top. Is there-
organizations that provide free attorneys for men.
Okay,
that-
good. Which organization provide free attorney services for men? Do you know of any?
I've yet to hear of any. I mean, there are several organizations that provide.
That's Parental, yeah.
Yeah, there are several organizations that provide free attorney services for victims of domestic abuse. The super duper majority of those are for women, and men are not eligible to receive those services. So again, you're talking about where you have a non-custodial parent who has a child support obligation, and he also has to carry the burden of these exorbitant legal fees for the competent attorneys. And then on top of that, if we're dealing with a case of parental alienation where the custodial parent has seized custody of the child, so now you might even have to pay fees to have reunification therapy or re-engagement therapy to to strengthen those parent-child bonds that perhaps were severed during the time that the order of protection was in place. The fees they scale up at an astonishing pace. You could be talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars over years and years of litigation and therapy and just on and on and on. So when one side is getting free legal counsel and the other side has to pay upwards of $3 to $4.50 an hour, it's not a level playing field.
Let me just make this comment. Maybe there should be some organization formed where men can get same kind of legal representation. Maybe that's an idea.
So I would agree with that. There's a fundamental social issue that we need to be addressed, that women receive these badges of honor when they are in a victim role. And
But the reason being because the majority of the cases of women being victim, you can point cases with men being the victim, but the majority of the cases that exist in society, including the Jewish world, are women. Let's be honest about it. Now you're going to point me if it's 10%, 20%, whatever the numbers are, but the majority.
We have to rein our own people back in where it's it can't be. It can't be cool. It can't be heroic anymore to bear the badge of the victim. And there are too many individuals out there who are abusing this privilege, so to speak, of victimhood. And we need to change it. It shouldn't. If someone has a restraining order against their ex-spouse or against their domestic partner, it should be like, oh my gosh, why would you get a restraining order? Do we really believe that many members of our community were actually guilty or merited to have a restraining order placed against them?
Because it's easy to do, and it's an act of hostility against their spouse. Let's be honest. But we have a lot of people calling, so let's go to Joe, been very patiently waiting in Brooklyn. I believe Flatbush. Go ahead, Joe. Your question or comment?
Okay, I'd like you to please bear with me. I need to make a couple of points. Firstly, I've been in, unfortunately, a divorce confrontation for 15 years. My ex has had access to a free lawyer. She just litigated basically against me for the majority of the 15 years. Yes, there were orders of protections against me. Fortunately, they were removed very, very, very quickly. They're very easy to get with no basis. Luckily, I had an objective and fair judge in the family court, which is very rare. But I think I really don't want to talk much more about the court system.
So I want you to get to the point because we have a lot of people calling.
Okay. The point is very, very, very simple. I don't understand why people going to Goisha court are tolerated in our society. A woman who would come to shul without a shekel would be thrown out. A woman who goes to our kois should be thrown out. Our Rabbonim tolerate this archois, and that's a cancer in our society, and that's where all of this stems from. At that, I'm sorry to say that I heard about that meeting of broken ties. Somebody protested against one of the Rabbonim because he belonged to Shalom Task Force, and he was thrown out of the broken ties meeting. That's what I was told. We tolerate these organizations that send people to Goisha court. Now, there are very rare circumstances where someone has been assaulted and they have no choice. But in the vast majority of these cases, these orders of protections are bogus, they're false. And we need to throw out these women who go to Goisha court. And
it's not just the women going to Gentile courts, it's also the men. It's also the men.
Not true. The courts side with the women. The vast majority of men would not go to court if they had a choice.
And I want to say...
let me tell you something else, Zev. I spoke to Rav Avi Kahan, who has got a base in New City. And he admitted to me the following about a year ago. He had 49 or 50 cases of men not having proper access to their children, and only 7 cases of women claiming that they were agunas. Now, they can claim they're agunas from here to Australia. If they went to our courts, they're not entitled to a get al pi halacha. And that's the problem. And I'm sorry to say, your attitude personally is the same. You seem to think it's perfectly fine to go to our kois. I don't see the difference between being Mechalel Shabbos and going to our kois. The Torah prohibits both of them. And unless our rabbis get up and stop this and say that any woman who went to our kois just off the bat, without a proper heter.
You're raising a whole different issue about going to secular court. And by the way, you look at some of the great Hasidic battles end up in secular court. A lot of these, I'm just telling you what the facts are, and you have to, and that's a whole separate program that we can enact. We're gonna.
That's where this problem arises from.
Good. I appreciate your phone call. You made an interesting point. Yes, you were going to say what, Rachel?
If I think there's something here, the big picture that's being overlooked is the children. We're talking about, yes, getting restraining orders, and women who decide they want the upper hand and they try to use it, leverage it to make the secular courts get involved with the gets, and they force men to give them gets before they can even discuss the terms of custody, of financial support. And I just think the children are the ones this is child abuse. I have my 2 grandchildren who are 8 and 6 are crying to see their daddy, their father. And I made a comment after the Asifa, and I said something very interesting. I feel like it's, the old cliche that says an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I'm sorry, yes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. In other words, if we can prevent little children from being the victims of this cruel practice and the irreparable harm these children suffer from having a father or a mother removed from their life, erased from their life.
Well, that's a serious issue. As I said, alienation of the children.
But Jewish organizations have no right supporting these women in secular courts, and they are facilitating the alienation of children. And then what do we do?
I don't think the Jewish organizations are looking to facilitate the alienation of children. But I think what to happen is, and this is why I said there should be a males organization. A lot of these organizations are helping women. Let's look at that. You were saying something.
I'm just going to finish my thought. So now we're trying to cure it. Now we have 14, 15, 16, 17, like Betzalel's children and other people's children who are teenagers who have been poisoned for so long, have been alienated, have been fed lies by the alienating parent to the target parent, that then they don't want to see their kids they don't want to see their
But
father.
by the way, let me just say this,
And that's horrendous. And that has
maybe
to stop.
part of the
Jewish
solution has to
organizations
be,
have no place.
it's not only Jewish organizations, it's also the leadership. There has to be a way. Listen, at the end of the day, is the children that are suffering, correct?
Yes.
So the parents are so busy finding each other, the children become collateral damage.
Right.
There must
So-
be a means of maybe getting the organizations or getting the
so,
Rabbanim,
Zev,
the
I would
leadership
like
to
to
say about the
mention-
alienation of children. You were saying what, Batal?
Yeah, I would like to mention, so the co-founders of Broken Ties, they recently sent a delegation, a rabbinic delegation to Israel. They formulated a letter decrying parental alienation, and they went and visited many of the Gedolim of Israel across the gamut, Ashkenazim, Sephardim, Hasidim. They got many signatures. They're now adding even more signatures to the letter, and the resounding opinion is that the Torah leaders of Israel and also many Torah leaders in Lakewood, they've all come out unanimously to condemn parental alienation. Now, we understand that there may be times where you have a parent who has, unfortunately, there are individuals who have personality disorders who are just, not, people who need help, people who need to have, mental health issues, and they themselves need help. And sometimes these are parents. And sometimes, there is a place to create a little bit of a distance or a temporary distance between a parent and a child, but to engage in the act of parental alienation, seeking a complete and total cutoff from one parent to their child, this is something that the lay leaders of Eretz Yisrael and many in Lakewood, and again, like I said, there are many more signatures being added to the letter, they have completely decried. And just talking about the men's organization that you're suggesting, personally, although I think that in theory it's a good idea, legal fees and paying for court fees, we're talking about a bottomless pit here. And all of it would, I fear that it would just enable people to, okay, well, we're gonna go to war. Why? Because there's gonna be some organization out there that's just gonna keep funding my legal campaign. I would say we have to trend in the opposite direction.
But what I'm hearing tonight is that there are organizations that help women with their legal fees, and what I'm saying is to level the playing field. You have, but by the way, but having said that, I think the best solution is what you mentioned before with Broken Ties. There has to be more rabbinical pressure, leadership pressure to say whatever you are in divorce, the children should not be alienated.
Exactly.
That they should not. 100%. That should be spoken about in the shuls, and it's not spoken about when you have broken families, because whatever you're going to say, this one has better lawyers or not, but at the end of the day, it's the children that suffer, correct?
Exactly.
And so therefore, there has to be a way of making sure that whatever the situation is that the parents, the grandparents, the relatives should not be alienated from these kids. I want
to add in one more element if I can. But you have a sole custodial parent. You have a parent who has gone and alienated the kids from the other parent. So now, if you're home full time with your kids, whether you're the mother or the father, right? Obviously, your ability to work is going to be limited because you have 100% of the responsibilities for the children. So now you are relying on tzedakah money. Now you are garnering the sympathy of the entire community. There's constantly articles that are running in the Ami, the Mishpacha, the Jewish Voice, all these articles about the challenges that single parents are facing because, well, I'm responsible for my kids 100% of the time. And also to earlier points, when a woman is going into secular court and for example, the rabbinical leadership is not standing up against it, very often the father will feel estranged from his community because, hey, where were you to support me? Where were you to tell my ex-spouse to back down, to not try to bankrupt me, to not get these restraining orders against me? So that they feel estranged from the community and they drop out. We're losing great men they're losing their Yiddishkeit because they're losing their faith. So this is a very wide-reaching issue, and I think it all stems from the cultural acceptance of these hostile, toxic, contentious divorces. I think that as a
That's the problem.
culture,
It's the toxic divorces where people don't get along. Why not separate, get divorced, and just work it out, as opposed to, at the truth, I'm getting some emails. The biggest winners are the lawyers.
the biggest winners are the lawyers, 100%.
Yeah.
Well,
Sure.
if I could just say one more thing in that regard.
Yeah.
So certainly, I'm not opposing anything that anyone has said. Certainly, these organizations that help women could put the men into a disadvantaged situation. I will say that oftentimes in the custody matters that I dealt with, the men are the moneyed parent because they're the ones who are typically working while the wives have been raising the children. But nonetheless, I certainly support the idea of there being some leveling of the playing field in both regards. I will say that when it comes to now in private practice, when I represent custodial parents or non-custodial parents, the first thing that I say is, do not, while the children are with you, whether during visitation time or during your custodial time, do not impugn, do not say negative things about the other parent. The one thing, and I learned about this from a marriage counselor in Florida who was on Oprah Winfrey, fantastic, knowledgeable man on the issues of custody and divorce. If you talk about the other parent to your child, what you're in essence saying is the genes that are within you, which includes your father, are impugning the child themselves. You're criticizing the child in his gene pool by criticizing the other parent. So try to keep the children out of it. Not so
That's
easy.
very nice. Why not just share parenting?
How is
That sounds so
fair?
that's so heartwarming. Thank you, Judge. But why not just
It's
share
not a level
parenting?
playing field.
Just share the
How-
parenting, and then you don't
Okay.
have to.
Well,
How is
that's
that
something which the
fair?
court decide.
Ari,
Anyway, we're gonna
how
have
is-
to break. We're gonna have
how
to
is that
break
fair
right
when
now.
one parent
We're gonna
has
have to break right
child
now. I'm sorry, with
and
clock
bad
ticking. And
mouthing
here's
the
an
other
email.
parent who
The
can't
only
speak?
winners are the lawyers. Will the court proceedings dragged out? Just stuff money in the lawyers' pockets. It's a racket. Okay, we're gonna take a short commercial break. We're looking at divorce. We're looking from a male perspective as well. Lasalo Rotzen is with a group called Broken Ties. Judge David Kirschblum has been a family judge for 24 years now in private practice. Rachel Evans is also part of Broken Ties. She has 2 grandchildren she's not able to see. Baruch Nemtsov went through a terrible divorce. And of course, Rafal is in the process of going through a divorce. We're going to be right back. Don't go away. Stay tuned. If you're on the lines, we're going to get you. We're going to come back. We're taking some of your phone calls. 212-769-1925. Email is a great way to have your questions answered. Zev@talklinenetwork.com. We're going to be right back. Don't go away. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Talkline Network. Before we get back to our panel, let's go to Dove Sherman with the latest news in Israel. Good morning to you, Dove.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Zev. You know, today was my 74th birthday.
Happy
August
birthday.
5th. My Geisha, they call it my Geisha birthday, yeah. I thought I'd be 75 by the time I get on. You know, you got a great show going, you know, but I couldn't get in there. Anyway, let me tell you that we're sponsored by Quality Carpet, the latest news out of Israel. Sponsored by Quality Carpet, as we are when I'm on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights. Also, Quality Carpet at that new great address at 38th Street between 14th and 15th Avenue, right at the beginning of Borough Park. And the great thing is now that they have their own parking facility for customers only, which makes it so easy to shop. So now the 9 days and this Tisha B'Av is over and everything. So it's time to get yourself some new carpeting before Rosh Hashanah. Wouldn't that be great? So do not delay, okay? Get over to Quality Carpet. Make an appointment by calling 718-941-4200. 718-941-4200. Remember, Quality is in business over 50 years with their own cruising trucks to service you throughout the entire tri-state area. Okay, and let's go to a Gutnick Vart. Before we get to the news, let me tell you that it's so great, the Gutnick Chumash on the Vorim, you know. There's so many different Torahs about the coming of Mashiach. We're now enjoying 7 portions of positive stuff, and it's amazing. You should know that there is a book called Haftarahs, the Haftarahs of the Torah through the Gutnick Library, and it's a must for every Jewish family. It'll give you an insight into the coming of Mashiach. As a matter of fact, in the Gutnick Chumash it says that right now Parshas Eikev, it means heel, right? The heel of the foot, you know, which carries the whole body, and the whole body of this exile is going to be ending, according to the Rebbe. It brings him. It's so nice. He says that the mitzvah goes after the completion of the mitzvah. And even though our generation is very weak in Torah learning and very weak in the kind of emunah that Jews have had throughout the ages, but we're going to complete the mitzvah and see Mashiach Tzidkenu. So in that respect, we get the credit for the whole 2,000 years of exile when we succeed in bringing the Mashiach and Yetz Hashem quickly in our day. Get the Gutnick Chumash at all your local farm stores in the web at kolmenachem.com or call 1-888-580-1900. Okay, so let's go to the news now, that there was a terrorist attempt in Tel Aviv today, and Baruch Hashem, there was a police officer that suspected this person of being possibly a terrorist, and as they were checking him, they should have kept their eyes on him because he pulled out a gun and he killed the officer. And but in the end, they killed the terrorist and saved the nation from a very big terrorist attack. He had a letter in his pocket that said that he was going to die for the holiness of Allah, you know, for he was giving his life. So we know for sure that he was an Arab terrorist that was trying to do a major terrorist attack in the heart of Tel Aviv. And they're looking into how this Arab got from Jenin, you know, in the middle of the Shomron, at the northern end of the Shomron, actually, to that he succeeded in coming into central Tel Aviv. And again, of course, there was the 31st week of that rally against the decisions of judicial reform, which were taken by the Knesset with a majority vote, and causing this stir as Israel, this continuous, attempts at stopping the decisions of the Israeli Knesset, which won't work, of course. In any case, that's the latest news out of Israel. You got yourself a good McFarland in there, and I love you all, okay? This is Go Shalom.
Okay, thank you, Doe, for the latest news. We have a lot of calls waiting to come in, and we have a panel. Before we get to our phone calls, let me just say this.
You're listening to Talk Line with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
And we're back. We have a panel. We have a lot of phone calls. So before we get to our phone calls, let us, Rafal, you have a quick question or comment?
Just thanks. I just want a quick comment on what the former judge said just a moment ago. I feel like it just stuck out. And, he was saying that he tells the parents not to disparage the other parent. And I think that's very good. But that's it. I understand it makes him feel good. It makes him feel like he's doing something right. But why not just, positive for the kids? Why not just be the positive thing for the kids? Just let them share their parents. Just let the parents equally parent their kids. I mean, he doesn't even flinch. He's so entrenched and dripping in the system. He doesn't even see anything wrong with it. He uses terms like moneyed spouse and visitation. Why does one parent become a visitor? Like before the divorce, I'm hanging out with my kids. I'm taking out to a ball game. I'm being a parent. Post-divorce, I'm a visitor. I'm visiting them. The time I get with them is visitation. I'm exercising visitation. I mean, in more civilized jurisdictions, I understand he's in New York. Even in New Jersey, neighboring New Jersey, they don't call visitation anymore. It's archaic. I understand that.
I'm going to let the judge respond. I have a lot of calls I want to get to, so we're going to briefly answer the question, Judge. I got a lot of calls I want to take. Go ahead.
Sure. These are just labels. It's not disparaging. You want to refer to them as custodial and non-custodial. It's statutory. There are certain statutory references as to who is what insofar as roles, and insofar as why they couldn't co-parent. It could be for a myriad of reasons. Not always do the parents live in the same city, in the same state, or even in the same county. So if the children need some stability, they're going to school every day, and they're going to a school in Long Island, and the father lives in New Jersey, it doesn't really work well that the child is going to commute from New Jersey to the Long Island school. So we do the best we can, but I would also just note it's not a perfect system. I'm sorry that caller thinks that I'm arrogant. I tried my best as a jurist. Obviously, based on the evidence that was before me, it is an imperfect system, certainly. And I also understand Miss Evans' frustration as the grandmother on that side. I would be confident if you had a group of women who have also gone through the process, you'll hear equally a lot of frustration, not just from the Aguna perspective, but even from the perspective of having to go through a custody matter with someone who had the money to hire a big gun, a very well-respected lawyer. There's frustration on all sides. And insofar as what I do now in my private practice, I'd like to believe that I try to the best that I can to pursue justice. But, of course, I'm not the judge anymore. So therefore, I have to abide by the bench and what the court ultimately decides. We do the best we can.
Okay, we have a lot of people waiting to speak to you, so please, we're going to get to our phone calls. Let's go to Avram and Flatbush, waiting for over a half hour. Go ahead, Avram and Flatbush.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for taking my call. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Avram.
Okay, first, if I can make just a quick comment as introductory, and that is that I think it's a little bit deceptive, the fact that we have a judge here as part of the panel. I mean, I'm all for hearing from all sides on all parts of it, but there seems to be an implication that, we'll ask him about, what really goes on in the courtroom, and he would have, so to say, have the final say in that. And the fact is that the people that are, some of the callers, as well as people who are other people on the panel, have complaints about, basically they think that the court is corrupt, if you could just put it shortly. So a current or former judge of the system is effectively the defendant here.
Well, actually, hold on, let me stop here. We have a lot of callers. Let me just, in the interest of time, be succinct. Is that we have all perspectives here, and you may not like what a former judge or a judge. You have obviously maybe have a problem with the system, but if we're having a frank discussion, the participation of somebody who's part of the system is essential. But you have another point that's the main point you wanted to make.
Okay, fine. As long as people understand he's just one opinion of many. But the main point is that
nobody said he's the only opinion. That's not what was said. That's not what the show is all about. Your other
point. For clarifying that.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying. The main issue is that the issues that the judge was making before, I'm not saying it was done intentionally, but were highly deceptive in terms of what's actually taking place in the courtroom. I'll just focus on one and
briefly because we have a lot of calls. Yes.
But the notion that the order of protection is sometimes given, when it's not clear, just because to err on the side of caution, It's not on the side of caution. It's given on the side of one party. What's being completely ignored repeatedly throughout the system, and this is not one case, this is systemic, is the pain and suffering and trauma of the respondent. The severe trauma and the fact that there's mandatory arrest laws puts the person, the respondent, which is usually the man, but not always the case, in a living nightmare of perpetual psychological paralysis, and always afraid of who knows what I'm doing now. Are they going to make up something that it's a violation and end up in jail, not end up in jail? That's just one of many components to it.
I'm going to let the judge respond. I'm going to let our panel
if I could just throw in one last thing,
30 seconds. I have a lot of calls. I want to get to them. Yeah,
is that the legal process itself is a living nightmare. So the notion that just get yourself a good lawyer and that sort of thing, and then it will work out, is not the story. The judge mentioned that it's a temporary order until there's a hearing, but that hearing could be 2.5 years later. The relationship with the children and other things can be permanently ruined, in that quote unquote temporary time span. So yeah, I'd appreciate if you can respond to that.
Go ahead, Judge. You're on the
So
hot seat.
it wouldn't be a 2.5 year process, but I certainly appreciate
that's
let me
completely
finish.
false.
Hold on. Let the judge.
I know cases where it was that. It was 2.5 years.
All right. Well, not
Okay. So
certainly,
let the judge respond.
that I
Go
was
ahead.
ever involved with. But nonetheless, I listen. I understand the frustration. I truly do, and I'm not. I would like for the listening audience and even for the panel to know I'm not taking the other side insofar as what the system is. It's the system. Whether it's perfect or not, I would suggest that there are a lot of problems in every system. And
No, that's a whitewash.
Let me finish,
please.
Let him finish.
But with regard to the fact that there are these egregious cases, there are. But at the same time, the purpose of the order of protection is to protect someone. So for all of these cases, you have those scenarios where a woman has been badly beaten or a man has been badly beaten, and they need protection. So instead of getting the other party before the court and having that type of interim hearing take place immediately before any document is ever signed by a judge, this is the system that the legislature, and remember, the judicial system has to abide by.
So then there's something corrupt with that. There's something corrupt with that's the law.
Let me finish. By rules and statutes that were not written by judges, but were written by those in Albany who have decided how we should adjudicate cases. Remember that. There is a legislation.
We're being controlled by the Bar Association because they're the major the
Sir, I
biggest
must
lobby
tell
in
you
Albany.
that if you were in my courtroom, I find you definitely very rude. You like to be heard, but you don't like to listen. Nonetheless, let me finish. So to the extent that we're following those directives of the legislature, the fact is that those cases are filed. We do make a determination interimly, but at the same time, it's not a perfect system. It is ex parte. There is a one-sided decision of an exclusion or a restraint. The allegations have to be egregious to have someone else be taken out of their home, but then they're supposed to get a return date, not 2.5 years later. The return date should be within the next week to 2 weeks. That's the way, at least it was.
I don't think you were, unless I misunderstood, I'm not saying how you responded to what I'm saying. The fact is that the court is not taking into consideration the pain and suffering of the other side at all. So all you're telling me is that you're shifting the responsibility from the judges to Albany. Okay, so Albany is also to blame, but it doesn't. A system that has lent itself to systemic corruption repeatedly is not. It's not a question of something that happens incidentally.
Then, sir, I would say respectfully that you should run for office and start changing the rules instead of arguing about the rules we have now.
It's not a question of solution. The question is that can we acknowledge that there's something intrinsically wrong with that?
If there is a better system, I suggest that
Let me finish. When we talk about how the Arabs are attacking the Israelis, we understand that there's violence. But when you hear the secular media, they talk about it. They say that the Israelis and the Arabs have to stop the cycle of violence, implying that there's two sides to it. You're trying to make it like it's basically a good system, and sometimes, every now and then, someone will misuse it. That's not true. It's materially false. It's radically different from the way that...
I'm going to let the judge respond to.
I would suggest, sir, that obviously you have had your experience, one experience, that being your own. I'm sorry that you had that experience, but for you to start talking about percentages of the fact that the experience you had is the experience that everyone shares, I absolutely certain if
And
we
we're gonna
had
have
a
to move
panel
on.
of women who were on having their circumstances detailed, they would have a very different perspective. So I'm
Anyway,
just trying to keep thinking things.
I appreciate your phone
Somebody-
call, but in the interest of time, we have to be brief and please be to the point. Let's go to Chaim in Far Rockaway. Your question and commentary, guest. Go ahead. Chaim, are you there? Chaim in Far Rockaway, are you there? Okay. If you're not there, then we'll take another phone call in just a moment. And those that are tuning in, we're listening to a special program dealing with that, dealing with male's perspective. Let me ask you this question about broken ties. Let me turn to you, Bitzalo. How large an organization are you?
There are several hundred members, and unfortunately, there's just so many more people joining up every day. The numbers are staggering. But at the recent gathering that Mrs. Evans referred to, one of the speakers was Rev Moshe Tuvyalif, and to quote his words, "Ain bias, believe mace." You know, you don't have to even go 6 degrees of separation anymore to find someone who's dealing with parental alienation on some level in within their family, whether it's a brother, sister, neighbor, cousin, aunt, uncle. Everybody's got somebody. You know, as the divorce rate increases within our community, so you know, just it's simple math. You know, how many divorces are there? How many divorces become contentious? So even if you just say that it's 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5. So, in these contentious divorces, the parental alienation, is very prevalent. And then you also have a second aspect of parental alienation that's not even related to divorce, but just, we live in an age of empowerment of children. So, parent and child, where, the parents are living together and then the child is living at home. And the child decides that they don't like what mom and dad have to say. We don't like what Ima and Abba have to say. And the kid starts acting up in school, and the kid goes to a therapist somewhere, and then the therapist says, if you feel like your parents are being, unduly harsh with you, it's up to you to stand up to them and challenge them and tell them you need to set boundaries. So, that idea of individual empowerment is pervasive in the secular culture.
I hear that. Brandon, we have a lot of calls. Let's go to Vicky is in Long Island. She is an advocate for men in these situations. So Vicky, are you there?
I heard about this topic and I wanted to call in, especially because there was a repetitive reference to an organization that I'm quite familiar with in my in my appearances in court and helping fathers, helping advocate for fathers who really, many of them, if not all, have very, very little support. It seems like it always goes to the other side. And I'm a woman, and I can say that quite frankly. And so, and I've dealt with the Shalom Task Force, and as a result of supporting, several parents, actually, several fathers, I have been attacked, maligned. I mean, I've been, my name has been put in what they believe is my name has been put in court records.
Vicky, I'm going to ask you to be succinct because we have, the clock is ticking.
So I'm just trying to say that, even when these fathers get help from parent advocates, from their community or from outside of their community, the organization Shalom Task Force, their legal services team, Sarah's Voice, will attack. Even a woman, they will attack. There is no,
Again, there's nobody here from the Shalom Task Force to represent their side, but the point that you're making is that men have a hard time in the system?
They don't only have a hard time in the system. They are, even when they have help, outside support, they double down on their support and they attack their support. They leave them feeling or attempting to make them feel hopeless and helpless and like nobody's listening. And I've seen a lot of men, a lot of fathers just throw in the towel and say, why do I want to keep doing this? I don't want to keep doing this. Like I can't take it. I go into court. All I feel is I'm going to get ambushed. I'm going to have this legal team of pro bono taxpayer dollars attorneys on one side and a judge that's looking at them overly sympathetic. And whatever I say falls on deaf ears. And even when I have support and even when I have help, the first thing that this taxpayer dollar organization comes in and does is attacks my support system. They attack my family. They attack my friends. They attack whoever
Again, there's
comes
nobody. They're not here to defend themselves. So you're making allegations, which I'm not familiar with, but I'm just saying they're an advocate for women, and they should be. They're advocate for women, and maybe there should be some groups advocating for men. That may be part of the solution.
Do you know how hard it is for a man, especially a Jewish man? What I have come to find out working, because I've become very familiar with several parents that I've helped, Jewish Orthodox men. Do you know how hard it is for them to come out and say that I was a victim of domestic violence by my spouse? I mean, it's hard for a regular secular man to come out, but do you know how much harder it is for a man from the Jew?
If a man is working,
go ahead, Baruch. What were you saying?
If a man is working, he's not eligible for domestic violence support because it's income based. So typically, if somebody has a regular job, they won't be eligible for support. I reached out to Shalom Task Force for assistance, and they ignored me. I reached out to the Bestin as well, who facilitated our get, and they also ignored me, as well as the rabbi of my son's shul, who takes pride in being his rabbi, but won't support parenting or helping out in any discussion. He actually just...
And you gave the get from the get-go, right?
I initially brought my former spouse to an impartial Bestin, and she didn't want to participate in the Bestin. So she went to court to file a divorce proceedings, and the Bestin ruled that she brought me to a Bestin right after that, asking for a get, and they said we should arbitrate all matters in the Bestin, but she refused to do that. All she wanted to do was continue in the court and go to the Bestin at the same time to double dip. So they decided that it's not the proper time for a get until we come up with financial resolution, which eventually did happen. But that same Bestin just are deaf ears, because even through the divorce proceeding, she protested to my own workplace and my family, saying, I'm not willing to give a get. But the same people that are protesting that she wants to date another man is not going to ask her why she's not allowing my own son to have a date with his own father. And I think that society needs to put a shift on, instead of looking at the women or any gender's marital status, whether they're single or remarried, it's not as important as whether the child is able to have a date with their own parent. And we're not educating our children how to force them to encourage them to have a relationship with each parent.
But if I may, there's one more point that I'd like to address to the judge, if I may. When we are dealing with matters such as spousal maintenance and child support, these are matters that are fairly black and white, and if the obligor will fall behind on their payments for either child support or spousal maintenance, the recipient of those payments could very easily get a highly enforceable motion against the obligor. However, when in the event of custodial interference, in the event of one parent engaging in parental alienation and the injured party going to enforce visitation or enforce parenting time, that is not as highly enforceable. So there, an individual could spend, again, tens of thousands of dollars to hire a competent attorney. But then it's definitely, would you agree that parenting time enforcement is not as seamless and straightforward as, for example, financial enforcement would be?
And by the way, that injured parent is also paying child support and alimony. So he has to be paying that, and he, on top of that, needs to get a competent attorney. So imagine that. He doesn't have Somehow he's supposed
Sorry,
to come up
Judge,
with
we can't hear you.
Go ahead, Judge.
I'm sorry. To answer your question, yeah, it definitely is a longer process. Custody proceedings are. Usually child support, if it's ordered by the family court, is through, it was raised before, someone said something about 4D. 4D is the support collection unit, or in New Jersey, it's the probation department that collects child support. So determining the arrears that are owed for unpaid child support or spousal support, it's a very easy type of calculation to know what has not been paid. As to whether the non-payment is willful or not, that could be a very long process. So there's two standards and two tiers that non-payment of child support results in. Number one is a money judgment that could be done by the court quite quickly, simply based on there not being compliance with a court order. But insofar as willful contempt, where courts can incarcerate for non-payment of child support, the parents, in this case, let's say the non-custodial parent is a father, they're automatically entitled to appointed counsel from the 18B or from another panel.
I have to disagree with you because
Let me
that
finish.
happened
Hold
to
on,
me.
let him finish.
Let me finish. It is by statute. It's 454 of the Family Court Act. So I don't know, Mr. Nemtsov, which court you were in, but if it was in New York State and you didn't
Nassau
get a
Family
lawyer,
Court.
then
I
you
asked
should have.
for representation.
Well, if
I
it was a willful contempt
in
support
jail.
proceeding, sir, you
Yes.
absolutely were entitled to representation of counsel. And if the court didn't give it to you, it was an appellate reviewable process. They did wrong. And Mr. Nemtsov, I'm not going to suggest courts have not done you wrong. So when you didn't have that experience, doesn't mean that the court system handled you correctly. I'm not suggesting they were.
Saying
But
that it's a
insofar-
general, process, but the judge can choose whatever they want, and they deny whatever you request.
Well, the judge might very well have done that, but that doesn't mean that they're in comport with the laws of the state of New York.
If I may, Your Honor.
Hold on, we're going to have to break.
circle
And
back.
we're going to have to break. And when we come back, our final stretch, we're looking at and the divorce process. But Sala Rothstein and Rachel Evans is with a group called Broken Ties. Baruch Nemtsov has gone through a horrible divorce, as is our other guest, Rafal, is going through one. And of course, Judge David Kirschman is a former family judge for over 24 years. We're going to be right back. Don't go away. Stay tuned. We'll try to squeeze in one or two more of your phone calls. 212-769-1925.
You're listening to Talk Line with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
Our final stretch, we'll squeeze in one more phone call. Yankel in Brooklyn, thank you for waiting. Your question or comment for our guest. Go ahead, please. Succinctly.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Your question or comment, we're almost out of time.
Okay, the order of protection process doesn't do anything to protect the woman. It only protects the judge, very simply because if a woman applies for an order of protection against somebody who is actually a violent criminal, that violent criminal will continue to violate the law and attack that woman anyway. So the order of protection does nothing. It only endangers an innocent person who an order of protection was placed against. But if anybody wants more information about any judges and what's actually going on, They can go to the rovingroom.com and look up names like Esther Morgenstern and David Kirschblum and find out about who these judges really are.
Okay. David, what do you say about that?
The roping room is definitely a place where you can stay anonymous and do a lot of damage to judges' character and fitness, but judges don't take it very seriously. I must say, this is an adversarial proceeding. You're always going to have in every proceeding one party who's going to be unhappy. That's just the nature of the game. And when I say game, I don't mean it's a game. There's nothing funny about it. It's not a game. It's real life, but it's an adversarial proceeding, and ultimately, one party is going to feel wrong. And sometimes both parties feel wrong.
But we are missing.
Okay, we have 30 seconds. What are you saying, Rachel?
We're getting so caught up in all the administrative and all of the bureaucratic red tape that goes on in the courtroom that is stacked against children and stacked against men. May I just say that my whole purpose for coming on and trying to be some kind of a spokesperson for, for broken ties and also for children is that it's just not okay. It's not okay. Children are suffering. Children are suffering by the hands of Jewish organizations, an organization like Shalom Task Force, which gives endless free legal representation and does not allow the other side to have any advantage.
So we have to have Shalom Task Force on. We're out of time,
yes,
so I want to thank you. What's Broken Ties email address or phone number? What's the number?
You can reach Broken Ties online at Parental Alienation 613.com, and you can also email them at brokenties3@gmail.com, BROKENTIES3@gmail.com.
Anyway, I want to thank you, Batsala Rothstein and Rachel Evans of the Broken Ties. Baruch Nemtsov went through a divorce, and other Gabriel is going through a divorce. So thank you for being with us, for sharing some of your perspective, what's going on. And of course, Judge David Kirschman, former family court judge, now in private practice. Thank you for joining us as well. And we hopefully
and thank you for having us.
Listen, it's a complicated issue, and I wish we can resolve it. And what I keep saying, the most important part is the children. The children should not be alienated for any spouse, no matter what the parents don't love each other, they hate each other, whatever the situation is. The kids have to be protected. Thank you for being part of our show.
Would you be willing to have a next forum, a continued forum, bringing on some of the representatives of these organizations?
I'm happy to put up some of these organizations.
I think a healthy debate between us would be very productive to everybody involved.
Actually, anyway, thank you for being part of our show tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Zev.
Okay, there you have it. All right, we're out of time. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned next.